Started. I am going to introduce myself and my co-host Leah. My name is Bianca Delbois. I am the Director of Development and Communications with the Animal Protection Party of Canada. I'm joined by my co-host Leah, who is the Chief Agent of the party, and our host is Liz White. Some of you may be familiar with her if you are longtime supporters. Others may be new today, so welcome. Liz is the leader and co-founder of the Animal Protection Party of Canada. She actually began her career as a registered nurse and has spent her working life advocating for a fair and just world. Liz has spent over 40 years as a community activist and has worked on progressive issues, including advocating for the disadvantaged, animal protection, and Aboriginal land settlements. She's worked on an animal and environmental protection since joining the Toronto Humane Society in 1987. Liz was a founding director of the Animal Alliance of Canada when it was formed in 1990, and she has participated on a number of government advisory councils at the municipal, provincial, and federal levels. So, Liz will be your host today for this webinar, which is titled Using Your Voice for Animals in Politics, a topic that is very important right now. So again, we're happy to everyone who's joining us live on the call. For anyone who can't make it today and you are seeing a recording of us, you will get the full recording in your email after this webinar presentation, as well as these PDF slides that you'll see today. And you will also be receiving some resources, frequently asked questions and resources as well. And then you can, of course, we'll have contact information for you to contact us if you have any other questions that we can answer for you. Just one more reminder before we begin, your attendance and your questions are anonymous, so we won't read out your name unless you have a special mention or shout out for Liz and you don't mind, then I can let her know. The Q&A box for you to submit questions is just located in the toolbar of this webinar presentation. You should see it in the bottom kind of toolbar here, and it says Q&A with a question mark. The chat will be off for the presentation, so you'll just have to submit any questions or comments in the Q&A section, and that's how we'll be able to communicate with you today. We will not be having cameras on or microphones on other than myself and Leah and Liz. So if you do have a question or comment and you want to speak with us, just submit that in the Q&A box below. I guess without further ado, we'll get started. And just one final reminder, this session is being recorded. So again, you're anonymous, but you will get a copy of this recording when we're done. Okay, Liz, you can take it away.
Hello, everybody, and thank you so very much for attending this. The name of the session that we're doing is Using Your Voice for Animals in Politics, as you can see on the screen. And I think it's a very important consideration to actually think about what we can do for animals in politics. So today's discussion really is about in three parts, and then there's a Q&A at the end. The first is why this federal election matters for animals. The second is who we are, and the third is what our platform is all about. So why does this federal election matter for animals? If you look to your right, actually, if you look to your right, there's a picture of two macaques, a mom and a baby, long-tailed macaques. These are animals that are being taken out of Cambodia from the wild illegally and brought to Canada for research. And so we're trying to get that stopped. So that's the importance of that particular picture. So election decisions impact animal lives. I mean, the newly elected leadership will shape laws on wildlife protection, farming practices, and climate action. All of these affect millions of animals. And animals can't vote, so we have to do it for them. People have to go to the polls and say, I'm going to vote for the animals. They have no voice at the ballot box, so it's up up to us to speak for them and make their welfare a priority. We want to build a political will in Canada. When candidates see voters who care about animal issues, they're more likely to act. Our collective voice in this election can drive policies that save animal lives and reduce suffering. And it provides a real opportunity for change. Election time forces politicians to listen. It is our chance to put animal protection on the national agenda and push for stronger laws. I remember when I was a candidate in Thornhill and a huge audience was there, probably not very sympathetic to our cause, but anyway, I did my little talk and people came up afterwards and said I had no idea. I didn't know what things were like for animals. Thank you very much for running. So the Animal Protection Party, what are we all about? Well, first of all, we're North America's first federal political party, and we're dedicated to the protection of all animals and the environment. We're Canada's only party for the animals. The Animal Protection Party of Canada prioritizes animal welfare and animal rights. And in a way, we formed the Animal Protection Party in kind of a vacuum only in Canada, but we learned that there were many parties around the world who are also like Animal Protection Party of Canada and are also are quite successful. So why a political party? By running for elections, we put animal issues on the public agenda and gain platforms that other parties wouldn't often devote to animal protection. And that's what I mean when I went to the all candidates meeting. My talking about animal issues and environmental issues, I was the only one. We were founded in 2005 and formally again in 2006 when I ran as a candidate. And we were asked to, Stephen Best, a good colleague of mine, suggested that with the legislative changes that came in, that we might want to consider becoming a political party. And that was maybe late 2004 into 2005. And so we approached first of all, our members and to ask them, do you think that this is a good idea? And we got an overwhelming response from a number of dedicated people who said, yeah, I think we should go for it. And so based on what our membership, the support of our membership, we decided to move forward. And we had other experienced advocates that also helped us in that regard. And forward-looking and compassionate. I like that. We have a vision of a more compassionate Canada. And I think when we look at the United States right now, I think we pretty much are a more compassionate Canada. And we're one where government policies reflect respect for animals, people, and the environment alike. Our platform, animal protection, environment, and much, much more. So, of course, we're for ending animal exploitation. It's at the core of our beliefs that we need to end industries that systematically harm animals. We want to protect wildlife and habitats, and our policies aim to preserve biodiversity and respect wild animals as sentient beings, not resources. And that's why we are working on things like banning poisons, because poisons are used to kill coyotes and wolves, to protect agriculture animals, farmed animals. And so it's really important that we are able to discuss those issues at the federal level. Those are federal issues, and we can raise them with the various government officials that are responsible for it. And in fact, we've been quite successful at moving away from poisons. We've got one main one left, compound 1080, and we're working to get that banned as well. Climate and environmental leadership. The Animal Protection Party of Canada calls for treating climate as a true emergency. We support aggressive climate measures to protect ecosystems. Now, I just want to say on this point, what all our particular leaders are talking about is that the tariffs are an existential an existential threat to Canada. And indeed, it's going to be very, very hard for people are going to lose their jobs, and there's going to be a crisis, a really bad crisis for people. But the real existential crisis is climate change, climate heating. It's a thing that we need to work on because it cannot be reversed immediately. And in fact, we're going in the wrong direction. And we now know that there is a series of mayors all across the country who are writing a letter to all the political parties saying, we've experienced climate change and we need to be working on it. So it's one of our main issues. And our one welfare approach or one rights approach, our platform links animal well-being, environment sustainability, and human well-being. By protecting animals and nature, we also create a healthier, safer future. It's kind of like the idea of one health. All our health and our welfare are tied with the animals and the environment. And a good example of that is avian flu, which is now transferred to farm animals and into humans have it now. And some people have actually died from it. And so we know that these intensive animal agriculture practices lead to these tendencies for expansion of these kinds of viruses. And so we need to begin to change what we do. And the one welfare approach is the way to go. So social and economic justice. So this is speaking to the whole of us. A humane and fair economy. So our economic vision should be rooted and is rooted in sustainability, not in endless growth. Our current economy grows based on consumption. And given the world's population and the amount of consumption that countries like Canada, the United States, and the Europeans do with consumption, the planet can't sustain it. And so we're talking about a steady state economy. So the steady state economy is about a balance, that you don't dip into your ecosystem balance, that you live in a way that allows you to live in a steady state so that you don't damage the environment in the way that you live. And so we need to change our economic ideas in order to do that. Trade that reflects our values. This is very, very important. Trade should uphold, not undermine our values. We are also opposed to trade deals that harm animals, including those enabling live export or lowering animal welfare standards. And this is a really good one because I know from talking to other people who have worked in this area, like Stephanie Brown, that mother pigs who are no longer able to give birth to their young are, in some cases, loaded into trucks and driven huge distances into the States for slaughter. And why we do that is beyond me. I think that should stop. And of course, that's all the issues that we're working on. Compassionate social policies. So we champion progressive policies like a basic income. And looking at what we're going to be faced with as a result of tariffs, having a basic income would have been a huge protection for people who are going to lose their jobs or whose businesses are going to shut because they can't deal with the tariff issue. And it reduces inequity in our own population, helps with issues of homelessness and so on, and it strengthens communities. Our approach to justice applies to both people and animals, building a more inclusive, compassionate society for all. And just so you know, on that front, we are intervening in the ag-gag legislation in Ontario. And so we'll see where that goes. So that will begin to allow us to actually expose what goes on in animal agriculture practices in Ontario. So electoral reform, a fair voice for everyone. I think we all have a sense the first past the post is broken. Canada's current voting system often distorts electoral results. Under the first past the post, a party can win a majority of seats with far less than 50% of the vote, leaving millions of voices unheard. It's winner takes all. It doesn't matter if it was 51% to 49%, it would be the winner takes all. And the 49% do not have a voice through that particular politician. Smaller parties are sidelined, and many Canadians feel forced to vote strategically. It's unfair, outdated, and definitely undemocratic. And to that extent, we're working on that issue as well. Real representation with proportional voting. So we support proportional representation where seats reflect the share of the vote. This makes every vote count and encourages cooperation among the parties, which I think is really important given how the parties don't get along very well right now, and leads to more representative governments. Proportional representation is used in many countries, and in some of those countries, animal political parties have seats. And indeed, in the Netherlands, where there is the Party for the Animals has a number of seats at the European, right from the European Parliament, right on down through their government system to right into local situations. So it means that we might be able to get some people elected to the federal government and actually have a voice. Taking action for fair voting. So the Animal Protection Party is supporting the Charter Challenge for Fair Voting. It's a legal case arguing the first past the post violates Canadians' charter rights. We contributed funding to the case and continue to monitor it as it goes through the courts. And if it reaches the Supreme Court, if it's agreed to be heard at the Supreme Court, we are going to act as interveners, or going to apply to see if we can act as interveners in that case. Canadians deserve a fair electoral system, and we are helping to make that happen. So the importance of minority votes in a democracy, and I would point again to the picture because they could be a minority vote, or we, excuse me, we could vote for them and give voice to their minority voices. So big ideas start small, and I think we all probably have memories that is exactly the case. Major social progress often begins in the margins. We remember the fight to allow women to vote. And I remember when I was back working at City Council in Toronto, that there was a memory that tenants weren't allowed to vote in Toronto because they supposedly didn't pay tax, which is not correct, and they finally got the vote. So it hasn't been a whole long time ago that people have been excluded from voting. From environmentalism to healthcare to reproductive rights, today's widely accepted ideas were first championed by small parties and independent voices. Diversity strengthens democracy. A healthy democracy needs more than 2 or 3 major parties. More choice for voters means deeper debate, better policy, more representative government for all. And every voice matters. And remember that when you get out to go to vote, because every voice does matter. By supporting smaller parties like the Animal Protection Party of Canada, you can amplify ideas that challenge the status quo and influence broader political agendas. So key takeaways from this discussion. Your voice matters for animals. So remember when you go to vote, make sure your voice matters in that regard. So we recommend that you vote with your conscience, and I would very much agree with that. You have to be able to talk to the candidates in your area and see if you can figure out who might be the best person who will stand up for animals. And then you know who you would probably like to vote for. You can engage the candidates and community. So don't just stop at voting. speak to your local candidates and ask them about their stance on animal welfare and environmental issues. And just a little bit of advice. I used to knock on doors and people would come to the door and say, with the Animal Protection Party, say, oh yeah, I love animals. And usually when you get right down to talking to them, they mean dogs and cats, animals that they're familiar with. And so I would just recommend that we be very gentle in talking about the other issues of animal agriculture, because you want to bring people in and not sort of make them not want to hear the issue. And so I talk to the people that I'm talking to very gently about all the other animal issues. And most of them say that they just didn't know. Together for Change. So we have an opportunity here in this election to use our voices through votes, advocacy, and support, and to create a Canada that has values and protects all animals. Thank you. Now, just a reminder, this is the Q&A, so please, if you have any questions at all, please write them write to Bianca, and then I will make my best effort to answer them.
You have quite a few questions here, Liz, so I will start reading them from the top. The first question is, I have no Animal Protection Party candidates. I emailed the Green Party and NDP candidates, and I got good answers from both. I also called in Radio Noon and let them know animal protection is also a climate issue. So it's kind of more of a statement, but there was a follow-up question. Why is this election different from all other elections?
I think this election is different from all other elections because of Trump. And that's to say that the way he has decided that he is going to make the world pay for his ills, I think it provides us with an opportunity for real change. And I think that there's a sense in this election that people are looking for real change, somebody who can help us through this difficult time. And so I think people are thinking differently about this election. It isn't, oh yeah, I usually vote Conservative or Liberal or NDP or Green or whatever, or Animal Protection Party. But the sense is that people are really searching for something different. And so I think that allows us to have a broader discussion with people. I have an all candidates meeting next week, and so it'll be very interesting to see how open people are to talking about it, or whether they're going to be more closed-minded about it. It's been very hard to put other issues on the table, though, with the main parties talking, because it's mostly about Trump, it's mostly about tariffs, it's mostly about what we're going to do to deal with those tariffs and how is Canada going to cope. So, however, there are people that are looking for different things, and maybe we'll appeal to them, and I think we certainly should try.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks for that, Liz. We have another question here that says, what do I do if I don't have an Animal Protection Party candidate?
Well, that's going to be for a fair number of people, actually, because we have just a few candidates. This is a different election because it came so quickly, so less time to prepare for candidates. What I would recommend is that you look at all the candidates in your riding and approach them and talk to them and see if anybody is remotely interested in this issue. I would say, even if you start with a candidate that loves their dog or cat, that you have an opening to actually work forward in that regard. And so anything that gives you a sense that they're interested in the environment, interested in protecting wildlife, interested in loving dogs and cats, and maybe even looking at other animals, I would vote for that person. That would give you a chance that you could finally approach that person and see if he or she would help move animal issues at the federal level. And if you have a candidate like that and that candidate gets elected, please let us know, because we work with federal politicians frequently, and it's good to know who's more sympathetic and who's less.
We have another question here that I think was just answered. If you have anything else to add, feel free, but I do believe this was just answered in that response, but I'll read it anyway. It said, I usually vote green, but I'm wondering if there was a better way to strategically vote in this election. I have contacted all people running in my area, but I only heard back from the Green and NDP candidates, and gave a thank you to you, Liz. But I believe that. Did you want to add anything to that, Liz?
Well, I think just looking at who we worked with in the last government, the NDP were very, very helpful on issues like the macaque monkeys and others. And so, there was a sympathy there within the NDP, within the New Democratic Party federally, on animal issues. I don't think they have anything in their platform in that regard, but there were people within the party who were elected that were sympathetic. And, for all the complaints we had about Trudeau, it was the Liberal government that brought home the cosmetic and product testing ban. So, there might be a sympathetic Liberal candidate in your area that would be somebody you could work with. For example, in the Beaches riding, Nathaniel Erskine Smith, who's very, very sympathetic to animals, and he's a Liberal. Those are the two that I feel most comfortable with in terms of recommending who you might consider. But you'd have to talk to your local candidate to make sure that they've at least got some inkling about what we're all about.
Okay, fantastic. We've got even more questions coming in, so I'm just going in the order that they have come in here. The next question is, how will you strengthen the laws? How will the Animal Protection Party strengthen the laws to punish animal abusers?
Well,
And
that's a very good question, because we've been at that issue for probably 2 decades. It means at the federal level, it deals with certain types of animals and certain types of cruelty. And then the provincial level deals with other types. So at the federal level, you're basically guided by the criminal code, which states that you can't be cruel to animals. However, there are many loopholes in that particular piece of legislation. We tabled a number of years ago a recommendation of actually amending the legislation, but there was remarkably little appetite to do it. We were lucky because we had a minister that would oversee the criminal code, who was sympathetic to the issue and decided that we would move forward with amending the code. But it became so controversial and so convoluted and so difficult to talk about that most of us have just practically given up. Now, about talking about amending it, because amending it would begin to change how animal cruelty is dealt with in Canada. So there's that. Then we have the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, whose mandate is to end cruelty, to stop cruelty in animal agriculture. And so we've been working in places like auction barns and so on, and transport to slaughterhouses and so on, and documenting the cruelty that's occurring in those activities. I remember, this was before Animal Protection Party started, but I remember going to an auction barn, and I came upon a very, very tiny young calf who couldn't breathe anymore, was just foaming at the mouth, legs stand wide apart, just in this terrible suffering situation. And so I went all over the place to find out who was in charge, finally found the person, brought them over, showed them the calf and said, look, this animal, you have to deal with this animal. You can't leave this animal and auction her off. And said, no, not my problem. And so you realize that although the laws say certain things, often the government turns their eyes a different way. And, when you go, I sat through a court case about Maple Lodge Farms, who were charged with cruelty for chicken transport of chickens. And you just realize in that whole thing, they kill 350 to 500,000 chickens a day. And all you have to do is in your mind think of what that means. It's hard to visualize it because there are so many, but they do that in a day. There is no way that that could be done humanely, just no way. And so what we realize in the animal agriculture part of it is people turn a blind eye. The enforcers turn a blind eye to much of the issues that are going on there. So we need to be able to fix that. We need to have proper animal standards that are not voluntary. We have to be able to shine a light inside research laboratories where animals are treated in many different ways, and most of it isn't very good. And so we've got a lot of work ahead of us, but you know, we're documenting all that stuff. So whether we can proceed to court on it or actually get people who are sympathetic with legislation, I don't know. I find that politicians are don't want to touch the animal agriculture issue.
Okay. Thank you, Liz. We have another question here that is, when you live in a rural community in which the only parties that have a hope of being voted in are the Liberals or PC, how do you use your voice? We don't have an animal protection party in Nova Scotia.
Yes, I think it's really quite difficult for people who live in areas where, you've got basically two or three parties that are have any possibility of winning. And in some areas, people who are running are just, not sympathetic on those issues. I guess I would use my time to stand up if you have the courage. It's pretty hard to do, I understand that. But if you stand up in an all candidates meeting and make a statement and ask a difficult question of the candidates, I think that would be good. We have a candidate in Newfoundland, and he's faced with, of course, the sealing community and the fishing community, and he's done a pretty good job at going after and answering those questions. So I think the only really thing in a riding where you don't have much choice is to challenge the candidates that are running. And if you have smaller parties there that you might consider voting for, I would recommend that.
Okay, our next question here is, who can vote for the Animal Protection Party?
Well, if you're in a riding where you have a candidate, then anybody in that riding can vote for the Animal Protection Party of Canada. If you're in a riding that doesn't have a candidate, you can't vote for the party. It's just the way the election is set up. That's why we're looking at trying to implement proportional representation. I think it'll make it easier for us to actually run candidates in many, many more ridings than we're doing now, and actually give people an opportunity and a voice in those ridings.
Okay, great. Thank you. We have another question here that says this one came in a few different parts, but I will get to that because there's quite a bit there. This next question is, I am for the complete end of animal exploitation, including farm factories and slaughterhouses. Are you?
Yes, absolutely. But I would say it isn't going to happen overnight. And because we talk about, one health, one world, one everything, so that we're all interconnected, I think we need to document things that are going on. That's critically important. But we also need to open up discussion with agriculture folks, particularly animal agriculture folks, to talk about transitioning out of animal agriculture into a plant-based animal, plant-based agriculture farms. And that's already happening in Canada. There's enough of a market for vegan foods, vegan products, that there are a number of very large farms that are doing only plant-based for the vegan community. And those are happening even in places like Saskatchewan, and I believe in Manitoba, where it's, some of those folks are not so sympathetic to those ideas. And then there's the notion that we need to actually reduce the size of the farms so that we are more in touch with the soil and not having to use so many pesticides and so on and so forth. So we are moving in the right direction. And I think as climate change becomes a greater issue, and as eating plant-based meals becomes more popular and more common, we'll see that industry grow. But in order to make real change, I think we have to set up some kind of discussion with the agricultural community about how to transition out of the intensive animal agriculture first, and then animal agriculture altogether.
Thank you, Liz. Our next question here is, I missed a little bit about proportional representation. How can the average person help with getting rid of first past the post or other voting ideas like lowering the voting age to 16?
Yeah. First of all, I would ask, if you go to an all candidates meeting, I would ask all the candidates to tell you what they believe, whether they want to move to proportional representation. You might get a clear picture. I think you probably will get a clear picture out of some of the parties. Some of the others, I don't know so much. The second is, if you would want to give a donation to us to push the proportional representation through the Supreme Court, that would be also very helpful. And I think talking about it in your community, joining Fair Vote Canada, and getting reports on what's happening with proportional representation and the current situation in Canada. They have some very, very, very good charts that demonstrate how skewed our voting system is currently, and it really is quite eye-opening. Canada, it isn't that we haven't had a discussion here. We've had a discussion in British Columbia. We've had a discussion in Ontario and one other province, I think. All of those failed for a very good reason. In BC, it failed the first time, then they ran it again. The second time, it wasn't a 50% plus one would be a win. They increased the level up to 60%, and the vote was at 59%. So it's a big fight. It's a big change for people's ideas. Even the judges, when I sat in the original court case hearing, the judges were confused as to how you would transfer from our current system, first past the post, to proportional representation, and what would it look like, and what kind of proportional representation. And the lawyer said, we're leaving that, that is up for the federal government to decide what kind of proportional representation we're going to get. We've looked at single transferable vote and mixed member proportional, so you could maybe look those two up. The mixed member proportional is a bit more complicated than the single transferable vote, but both are okay. And there may be others on the horizon that we don't know about that we could use. But I think we just need to keep pushing. And Yeah, it's kind of like women getting the vote. It's kind of like all those issues that people have fought for years and years and years and years, and then all of a sudden won.
Okay, we've got a good question here. It says, I believe I read somewhere that even of our current FPTP voting system, if even a small percentage of the vote, perhaps 3%, go to a fringe party, it forces the major parties to pay attention to the issues central to smaller parties. Is there any truth in that?
Yes, I think there's absolutely truth in that. We haven't typically got a lot of votes at but I've realized I've been running in Toronto Danforth now for a couple of times, and and it's really interesting engaging with the other candidates. And yes, I mean, those issues are talked about. The problem is, once they get elected and they go to Ottawa, there is a tsunami of issues that they have to deal with. So that means that we have to be noisy enough to be heard and to be able to work with them in a way that benefits them as well as us. And that's a good sample. It's a good example of what we there was a collective group of people who worked on the cosmetic and product testing win that was in June 2023. We built a coalition of people, including the industry, that advocated for this. So it meant that the government, the Liberal government of the day, had protection from the industry, from a big fight, from everything. We sorted it all out for them and got it done for them, and they passed it. So I think we need to be smart about how we do things, about how we push when we're at an all candidates meeting to get commitments out of maybe the other candidates. If people in the audience, if you went to an all candidates meeting, get a commitment out of the candidates that they're going to help with the animal protection issues, that would be great. And of course, if you find out that they actually do, let us know.
Okay, so we've got another question here that says, what would be your timeline to change from a meat-eating society to at least a vegetarian society? And what is your plan for that?
That's a good question because, as you know, by being online, um, looking up recipes, looking up what people eat, looking all of that sort of stuff, the vast majority of people eat animals, the vast majority of them. But we know that not only does it contribute to global warming, but it affects our health. It obviously affects the animals, but it also affects our health. And I think we have a number of approaches that we can take. The first is, of course, advocating for vegan, encouraging more vegan outlets, shopping places, all that sort of stuff where you can access good vegan food, good vegan recipes, all that sort of stuff. Begin to change how people eat, which is a very, very difficult thing to do because people hang on to their traditional eating habits quite quite substantially. So, however, I think there's a real opportunity in terms of health. You look at the Princess Margaret Lotto that's going on if we're in Ontario. Um, they're raising tons of money to cure cancers and all sorts of other things, and all other hospitals are doing so. When we know that not all, but a good part of the diseases that affect us, particularly as we get a little bit older, are caused by what we put in our stomachs. And if we could convince the health community to actually begin to really promote the idea of vegetarian and vegan food, predominantly vegan food, um, then we might begin to change the attitudes of the population to actually considering changing over. So I think they could be a very strong ally in that regard. How to approach them? where they're, you know, um, where they're in difficulty in terms of numbers of doctors and all that sort of stuff. We might be able to approach the medical association and see if they would be at all interested in promoting that idea. I think that would begin to start the discussion in a much broader way than it has been already.
I also just want to mention quickly that we have some really informative reports about this on our website. So I will include links to some of the previously published works from the Animal Protection Party on this specifically as well. I will be sure to include that in our resources that is sent out in the email. So thank you for that question. Thank you for that answer, Liz. I have a question here that says, my NDP candidate is a researcher in microbiology, not with animals, but he thinks animal testing is needed and humane. How do I convince him otherwise? And I do want to also mention that there has been some mention about animal testing and animals used in research, and I think this is a good opportunity, Liz, for you to expand more on that so we can let some people know.
You want me to expand on the testing and research?
Yes, and what that looks like. And we can, I think this is a great opportunity to expand more on it and then also answer this question.
Um, I think it was a year and a half ago that I went to a, a conference on animal testing. And what was absolutely shocking to me was that many of the companies that attended that conference, who were not necessarily given to being pro or con animal testing, but did animal testing on their products, were there to learn about how to get out of it. And the reason was that animal testing in certain circumstances can be a lot cheaper and a lot more predictive than using animals to test. And so it meant it made perfect sense for these companies to begin to transition. And I believe that they are transitioning. They certainly can't market their products in Canada anymore. And so they're really looking for change in that regard. And so I think we're going to see a very significant movement. There is also other work being done on alternatives in biomedical research. So there's real advances being made. The difficulty is that, like one of the questions was that the person that they deal with was a researcher and also thought that animal research was completely humane, and without really knowing exactly what goes on in research laboratories. So there's a headspace within the research community that says we have to have animals. The animals are the things that show us, they mimic our human bodies, which they really don't. But what they're finding is that in the actual research that's being done on NAMs, non-animal alternatives, that there's great progress and greater predictability in terms of the end result of those particular changes to non-human animal procedures and tests and mechanisms, all sorts of different things. And so I think we're in a position now where we can begin to move much more quickly in that regard. What we need to do, though, what we are planning to do, is that we need to call out the research community that isn't moving in that direction. And there's a lot of them because, we work on 3 to 4 million animals in research a year, depending on what year you're talking about. And many of them are put through horrible experiments. And, just as an example, we made a complaint to the Canadian Council on Animal Care when we found out from the Department of National Defense, their work on piglets, that the piglets that they were working on that were supposed to be under anesthetic as they were mutilating them one of them woke up, jumped off the table and ran away. I mean, how could that be? How could you allow, when you were doing what you were doing to these animals, to allow them to wake up? So I laid a complaint with the CCAC. The CCAC said it was the lab's responsibility. The lab said they don't have anything on it. The CCAC says they don't have anything on it. So nothing. So I think we need to, we have exposed the Department of National Defense piglet work. And we'll continue to do that because I think it is so outrageous and extreme that it points to the fact that nobody really knows what's going on in research laboratories in Canada.
And so if somebody is in conversation with, for example, in this question, a researcher who thinks animal testing is needed and humane, what would your advice be to convince, if they were trying to convince them otherwise, that it was not humane and not needed?
That's really difficult. I mean, I would be happy to talk to that person. I would be happy to share. I've done freedom of information. So Ontario is the only province that has any laws regarding animals in research. So I'm allowed to do freedom of information to those entities. And I've got the inspection reports that the government did in these research facilities and what was the status in these research facilities of the animals. And I think that over half of the samples that I got, of all the inspection reports that I got, were in non-compliance with the Act. So some of it was simply structural, but a lot of it was about what the treatment of the animals, the handling of the animals, the disregard for animals that had been researched upon with surgery and were left alone on a towel on some counter to recover with nobody around to see what they're doing. I mean, it's over and over and over and over and over again. There were these violations, which means that the animals are not being treated in a humane way. And I think I'd be happy to share that with that person.
Great. I have a question here that says, how can we stop these hunts of bears or the bear hunt?
Yeah, that's a good one. That was a high point in our work and a very low point in our work. So in Ontario, we decided to take on the spring bear hunt. So in the spring, um, sorry about the phone. I kind of lost my train of thought. What was it? Can you repeat the?
How can we stop the bear hunt?
Oh, that's right. I'm so sorry, guys. So the bear hunt in Ontario was the one that we approached first. Well, we did a number of different things. Bears were hunted for their gallbladders and their paws and their teeth. And we managed to get that stopped. And in Ontario, we went after the spring bear hunt. We had a number of groups involved in it. And under Mike Harris, he ended the spring bear hunt. It was a high point for us, a low point for the hunters, and they basically went crazy and yelled and screamed and carried on that we had stopped, what is traditionally their right to do. And so, and then move forward to the Kathleen Wynne Liberal government it was the election she lost. She reopened the spring bear hunt to get votes in Northern Ontario. So it's very mercurial. You realize when you do these things, you never actually win permanently. You have to keep at it all the time. You never give up and you never stop. And so we're looking at other situations with bears and see if we can begin to impact that. I mean, the hunters always say they never kill female bears with cubs, but the female bears are out in the spring. They have dependent cubs. They haven't eaten all winter. They're very, very, very hungry. And there's very little natural food around that they actually can live on. And so they go to where the hunters lay out donuts and honey and all sorts of different things. And they are up in a tree stand and they shoot the bear from the tree stand. And they can't tell whether it's male or female. So not only does the female die, but the cubs, of course, starve to death because they can't take care of themselves. So, you wouldn't dare hunt a deer in the spring, you'd hunt it in the fall. Not that we're in agreement with that as some of our fights suggest, but the spring bear hunt is particularly egregious. And if anybody has any ideas as how to proceed in other provinces, that would be great.
We are getting a lot of questions that have a lot of similar questions about who exactly people should vote for if there isn't an Animal Protection Party candidate, which we touched on a bit earlier. Did you want to just do one more maybe blanket statement about how the public or the audience can identify who would be the best vote for them? And then we can also, I just want to mention that we will have contact information at the end of this presentation and in the email. So everyone here, if your question isn't answered, especially if it's about who to vote for or how to approach these conversations, we can get Liz to answer those questions offline as well. But Liz, if you don't mind maybe just doing one more general answer about this topic, that would be great.
Well, it just takes a little bit of legwork for the person who doesn't have an Animal Protection Party candidate in their particular riding. I would suggest meeting with, if you can, each of the candidates that might in fact take power and seek or not and seek information from them about their opinions about animals and what can be done to protect animals in the community. A lot of the politicians know nothing about this issue. So you're really starting at ground zero. So having a short conversation with them about it and asking them if they would be helpful once they're elected to take on some of the issues that you might bring forward to them would give you a good sense about who these people are and what they're prepared to do.
Great. We'll do a couple more here. And so one of the questions here is if there's no satisfaction apparent from candidates with no representation of animals, is a blank voting card useful to express one's opinion?
Yes, I mean, in a way, many people actually, not to spoil your ballot, but just don't mark it as a protest in a particular riding. And I can understand in some ridings that are particularly conservative, let's say, that even the other candidates in the area might be quite conservative as well. I know that in some communities, talking about this issue is very, very difficult. But so you can do that. But I would also recommend that while you're doing that, you talk to the candidates so you have a good sense about who they are. And if something comes up, they'll remember that you approach them and that they might actually talk to you about what your concerns are.
Great. We'll do a couple more here. And then just a reminder to everyone, if we couldn't get to your question, there were a lot of questions here today. So thank you so much to everyone. If we don't get to them, we can answer these offline as well. But I will just read a few more here for you, Liz, maybe two more questions.
Yep.
If that's okay. We've got one question here that says, as an educator, I try to engage young people, but it is pretty obvious that schools need to teach more compassion for animals, address our traditions that are mostly corrupted by beef, dairy, ag industries, and not value the norms that prevent suffering. And not values and norms that prevent suffering. Is it your feeling that first-time voters might be more or less inclined to vote for animals?
That's very interesting. It really depends on the person and their life experience to the date to when they can vote. I think you're absolutely right that we need to reach into the education system. And I think the new, sorry, I've just pulled a blank there, but the food, hmm? Sorry, the Canada Food Guide, it's changed substantially and it really promotes significantly upfront more vegan and vegetarian foods than of course meat and dairy and all that sort of stuff. And so it provides us with an opportunity to go to try and get the schools to talk more about alternatives to traditional way of eating. And it's very difficult to get into the schools to talk about that, but some schools are actually wanting to have that discussion. And so, but you know, the problem is the federal government went through that whole thing with the Canada Food Guide, and at the end of the day, it's kind of sat there and not done much. So I think we have an opportunity also to promote that so that so that younger people get a better education in terms of general animal cruelty and good diets and environmentally friendly way of living. And I think if we got to that, we'd have a lot more people who were sympathetic to voting for the Animal Protection Party of Canada.
Okay, and I think this last question that we can do here is a great way to end the webinar. The question is, what in your opinion is the fullest expression of a fair and just world for all animals, including humans?
Wow. A fair and just world. I think no animals in agriculture, no animals in research, that we look at animals not as commodities, but as beings that we share the earth with, that we recognize that each have their own interests and understandings of how they live, and that we need to begin to learn to cohabit peacefully with them, that we end, you know, the production of oil and gas and other global warming um, issues, you know, industries. And at the end of the day, live kindly on the earth, kind to each other and kind to the earth and kind to the species that inhabit the earth. You know, we have so many animals, smaller and often insects and plants and stuff, but so many have become extinct already. And so we need to decide that we are going to protect the rest of what we have and to enrich the earth so that however it evolves in an ecosystem, it becomes richer and richer with various plants, various animals, various insects, and so on and so forth, so that we are living in a very, very rich environment. And it will be a different one. We won't be able to consume the way we did. We won't be able to do things like that. But I think we'll live in a much more healthy world and a world where we can be happy, where we don't have to constantly work to make more money, to get more things, to do more stuff, that we can sit back and look around us and enjoy the world.
Great. Thank you for that, Liz. We had over 50 questions, so we weren't able to get to them all on this webinar, but I
Are
do
we off?
nope. So we're still on. So I just wanted to let everyone know that you can submit any questions that we missed to us. We have contact information that will be sent out to you, as well as resources, a recording of the webinar, and the presentation slides themselves. So if we did miss your question today, please feel free to reach out to us, and a team member or Liz will answer your question. So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who joined
I
us.
have to say one more thing.
Yes, go ahead, Liz.
Sorry. I just wanted to say, I talk to a lot of people who work on this stuff, and people get really discouraged because it's such a hard road forward. And what I got to say is, we have a community here. We can be together, we can support each other, and it allows us to never give up. We can't give up because there is nobody else who's talking for the animals and the environment. So we really need to work hard. And thank you so much for all your support and everything that you do. And thank you so much for attending this webinar.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Liz. Thank you to my co-host, Leah. Thank you to everyone who attended and asked great questions. We will be in touch with everyone soon if you reach out to us and ask any of the questions that we may have missed. And with that, we will say goodbye to everyone and have a good weekend.